Hello and welcome to In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. I'm Alexander Shin, and today in Taiwan we speak, at least 4 different languages. Today we're talking about a brand new book released this month, a collection of 4 stories by 4 different writers from Taiwan and Scotland. The stories are written in Tâigí, also known as Taiwanese and Scottish Gaelic, with accompanying translations in English and Mandarin Chinese. The book is titled Tâigael, Stories from Taiwanese and Gaelic. And I believe it's the first work of its kind, and I've got the chance to ask all about it, one of the people behind it. I am joined today by Will Buckingham, a British writer and publisher based in the southern Taiwanese city of Tainan. Will is one of the editors of Tâigael alongside Hannah Stevens. Will, it's a real pleasure having you here.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the release.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful read, although I do have to say quite a quick read because I obviously had to skip all the parts in Gaelic, Taiwanese and Mandarin. So is this true? Is this the first ever book published that features stories in both Taiwanese and Gaelic?
I think if there was something translated between Taiwanese and Gaelic and featured original stories in those 2 languages, we would have heard about it. So yeah, I think this is a historical first.
This is a totally different geography. How did this idea for this project come to you and Hannah?
So both Hannah and I are English. We've lived in Scotland and we now live in Taiwan. And in both places, we see ourselves as immigrants. Mm-hmm. And as immigrants, you start off not necessarily knowing about the diversity of the place you end up in. And in Scotland, when we moved there, we became more and more aware of the linguistic diversity of Scotland and more interested in that. And the same thing happened in Taiwan. We moved to Tainan. So Wind&Bones is headquartered in Scotland. It's a Scottish company. But we're now based as human beings. We're based in Tainan, but the company is based in Scotland. And when we moved to Tainan, I'd been learning Mandarin for several years. But when we moved to Tainan, we discovered that pretty much 50% of everything our neighbours said to us or taxi drivers said to us, we didn't understand. Mm-hmm. The ama across the street would say, "Li biki doi, where are you going?" And what is this? So in both places, we had that experience of, I suppose, of defamiliarization, which I always quite like, always find quite fascinating. And we started reading up on the linguistic histories, sort of histories of language diversity in both places. And we found ourselves at a conference in Taipei exploring those questions in the context of Taiwan, but also with some delegates from the UK and from Scotland and Wales talking about language diversity in the UK. Mm. And we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to come up with a project where we could commission some new work written in these minoritized, smaller languages and translate between them and see if through that we could build some sense of connection and solidarity between the speakers of smaller languages and writers in smaller languages in these 2 places that we call home.
Since you mentioned the stories, now we have to, of course, introduce the authors behind these 4 stories. We have 2 from Taiwan and 2 from Scotland. So we have Naomi Shim and Gyo Gyung from Taiwan. They've contributed wonderful stories, by the way. It was a very fascinating read for me. And we have Lisa MacDonald and Elisa Hunter-Dorrance from Scotland. Now, specifically, Elisa's story was more challenging for me because it's a totally different historical and cultural context. We'll talk more about this. But my question here, of course, is, have these 4 writers met each other? Did they have an opportunity to, sit down and have an in-person tea together?
An in-person tea, we love tea, and an in-person tea would be wonderful. We have we've met Naomi and Gyugyong because we are here in Taiwan at the moment. But we haven't met in person Lisa and Alyssa, and the writers haven't all met in person. So when we went looking for writers, we came up with the idea of the project first. Hannah did a lot of the research, finding writers she thought would be interesting for the project, fun to work with and doing interesting things. And after we found 4 writers we thought would be great to work with, We then had a Zoom chat and talked about the project. That's the only meeting we've had other than our WhatsApp group and endless emails and so on. We would love in the future if we could get, for example, our Scottish writers over to Taiwan or our Taiwanese writers over to Scotland to all be in the same room, drink tea together and maybe do an event, and that would be wonderful, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to see all of you, not 6, but 7 people, I believe, right, involved.
7 of us, yes.
Yeah,
so we also
quite
have,
directly
yes,
involved,
yeah.
because there's also one...
Sheng-Chi, our translator.
Yeah, it's quite a team.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about it, there's 4 stories, but each of them has translations into 3 other languages and a little bit more complex with Taiwanese that we'll talk in a moment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers to this work. I assume that the people who've actually contributed to this is probably beyond this, just 7 people, right?
It was a huge endeavour. We were funded by the Scottish Government, so we got a small grant, Scottish Connections Fund grant. And the team working on that were incredibly supportive. We also got some funding for audio, so there's audio you can go online and listen for free, and it's linked in the book via QR code. So quite late in the day we got some funding to do some audio versions of the story, which is wonderful. And so we worked with Creative Scotland on that, and that's now available online. We also did consult with other Taiwanese experts and other Gaelic experts, but mainly it was that core team of 7 people working together incredibly intensively, emails going to and fro, things getting lost and found in translation, finding connections between these stories from very different contexts. And so that was the bulk of the work, was with that kind of core team of 7 of us.
Now, is it safe to assume that Taiwanese, Tâigí, was the most challenging one to deal with in this production?
Tâigí had its challenges, and one of the challenges is the difficulties of writing Tâigí. So I'm not a mother tongue speaker, and I'm learning Tâigí quite intensively at the moment. But a lot of mother tongue speakers will say, there's no way of writing Tâigí. And that's something you hear quite a lot. And it's something that enters into one of the stories in the book, actually, as an idea that's one of the grandmother figures says, all her friends say that you can't write Tâigí. And you can write Tâigí. There's actually a long tradition of that. But there's no single system for doing it. So there's 2 romanization systems. People occasionally invent other ones. You can write using hand characters, but also there are all kinds of debates about which are the right hand characters to use. And this is a incredibly tangled area. It's quite kind of politically charged as well. And because many people speak Tâigí but don't read it and write it, so many of my friends who are fluent in Tâigí, and they look at the book and long kwamo, I can't understand it at all. That did present some challenges. But for us, because we are learning Tâigí, and I'm learning quite intensively, and Hannah's been learning some because I speak Mandarin. So the biggest issue was Gaelic, in terms of that being a bit of a black box. I started learning Gaelic, but very, very slowly.
You mean a black box for you two specifically?
For me and Hannah. So we had to rely very heavily on our Gaelic speakers, because that's not a language to which we have access. And in the team, none of us spoke all 4 of those languages. There's nobody who spoke Gaelic, Taiwanese, English and Mandarin. If there is somebody out there listening to this who's fluent in all 4 languages, I'd love to know what you thought about the book. Drop us an email. But nobody on the team had that kind of full competency in all 4 languages. So we were really having to work together to develop the book and develop the stories in the book and put it all together, taking account of the skills we had, but the skills also that we individually lacked, and filling in for each other.
Just to clarify, some of the authors here also contributed as translators, right? So there's a lot of work per person, in fact.
So our Taiwanese writers translated each other's stories into Mandarin. Our Gaelic writers translated each other's stories into English. And also our Taiwanese writers translated the Mandarin versions of the Gaelic stories into Tâigí and vice versa with the Gaelic writers. So in that way, everybody had some kind of quite deep involvement with all of the other writers on the team, which was great.
And was English the common denominator for all 7 people on the team?
It was, and we struggled with this as well in terms of we wanted to present this as a book where there was parity between languages, where we gave equal weight and equal value to all 4 languages, or if anything, a greater weight and greater value to the Tâigí and the Gaelic. At the same time, we were aware that that would become incredibly cumbersome if, for example, our preface was in all 4 languages and our book's published in the UK. It felt natural that for this publication, the book should have English as a sort of base language, and that was a language that we worked with together when we met, even though the stories are in different languages. We have thought about maybe a Mandarin translation, so the introduction could be translated into Mandarin and it could be packaged for a Taiwanese audience so that they could then have the same kind of access to the Gaelic and the Taiwanese stories. So we're thinking about, it's an interesting thing to think about a book that's already translated between 4 languages, what it would mean to translate that. We have been thinking about that as well.
I assume there's also no one single answer to any of the questions or considerations here, right? I mean, you might talk to different people and they will suggest different solutions. So going back to the conversation about Tâigí and its writing systems, right? You mentioned there's many. You did narrow it down to 2. So even though all the stories are translated into 3 other languages, for Tâigí, we get 2 versions per story, and that's because you've chosen 2 writing systems, right? One of them is Tâigí, which is quite old, and another one using Chinese characters, Hanji. Why these 2?
One of the sort of big debates is whether Taiwanese should be written in characters or in romanization. Those 2 options are clear in terms of what's out there in the book market in Taiwan. Most published Taiwanese books are published in Han characters. So from that point of view, we definitely wanted a character version of the stories, even though there are complicated scholarly and political debates around that, but we thought we wanted something that would be accessible and familiar to people who are used to reading Taiwanese with Han characters. At the same time, 2 Taiwanese writers, Kyung and Naomi, they are both very keen on Beiweiji. And Beiweiji seems to me like the obvious system to use for writing romanization. And one of the reasons I think for that is that within Tâigí there is a literary history that goes back, into the 1800s.
The first Taiwanese newspaper was written in Tâigí.
Of course. Yeah. And it goes back to Christian newspaper publishing, etc.
The missionaries.
And the missionaries. And that's the longest literary tradition of Taiwanese. And we wanted to feel connected into that literary tradition. There is the new system Tailo, which is a modification of Tâigí, but the feeling we often get with that is a system used as a prop for learning within a sort of a view that actually then you graduate onto characters. And I think Tâigí isn't that. It's a language for writing literature, and we are writing literature. So we wanted to connect into that literary tradition to see our stories as part of that literary tradition. So we decided to also go with Tâigí. I'm used to studying Tâigí as well because I use these ancient, 1980s, that's quite ancient textbooks for studying Taiwanese, produced by Mary Knoll, folks in Taichung, I think, the Catholic textbooks. They're some of the best textbooks available. The vocabulary is quite specific to the kind of vocabulary you might need if you're a missionary, which obviously isn't the kind of vocabulary I need, but at the same time they're very thorough. So I'm also used to Tâigí and working in Tâigí, and I think it looks nice on the page. I'm less keen on Tailo. So we decided in consultation with Naomi and Kyung, initially we were just going to do it in characters, and then I said, can we do Tâigí as well? And they said, yes, please, let us. We really want to. So yeah, we decided to do the Taiwanese in 2 versions.
Now, the newer system that you are mentioning, the Tailo, it is a little bit more versatile when it comes to typing on keyboards that are more familiar to us, right? How was the logistics of getting these Tâigí symbols through to your printing house? Because, Tâigí does include some unusual things like those dotted O's.
Yep.
And the subscript N for nasal vowels.
Yep.
How did you manage your way around it?
It is a problem, and we did all of the typesetting of the book in-house. So I did all of the typesetting in all. We took the text and putting it on the page, and the design of the page, and the design of the text, and the font choice. That was a challenge because we needed the look to be consistent between, for example, the Taiwanese romanization and the Gaelic, but also they are systems that are a world apart. So how could we, make that as effective as possible? And we spent a long time looking for Tâigí fonts that worked well. We ended up with Tâigí Garamond, which works beautifully for writing Tâigí, but doesn't work so well for characters, so we had to use a different font for characters. That was quite a challenge. Typing Tâigí is not a problem, but finding compatible fonts is sometimes a problem. But because we had full control over that, and we were doing it all in-house, we weren't having to bug a designer and say, oh, can you try this, can you try that? We could just spend hours and hours and hours tweaking it until we got it right.
Wait, do I get it right? The Gaelic text and English text, are they both written in Tâigí Garamond?
They're using Tâigí Garamond, yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because that works perfectly fine for simpler Romanized text without diacritics.
Right, that's an interesting detail.
Yeah.
And it's made in Taiwan, the font.
Yes.
Sourced from Taiwan.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now, there are audiobooks available, right? Which I guess solves the problem for people who cannot read. Yeah. Generally, it makes it accessible for everyone in any of the 4 languages here. But with Taiwanese especially, given that many people, they were either denied education in Taiwanese or simply never came across learning. The written system's one of many. And people would rather listen than read, right? And I think Naomi Sim's story here resonates quite greatly with this. There's, not to spoil too much, there's a grandma asking her granddaughter, a writer, in the end saying, you'll read your Taiwanese texts for me, I'm no reader, right? Does this resonate with the reader in Scotland?
I think it's a very different context in Scotland and Taiwan and the situation of Gaelic and of Taiwanese. So I think it's clear what's happening within the Gaelic context, but maybe there's not that same resonance. We were delighted when Creative Scotland got back to us and said they wanted to fund the audio. The sound of the stories felt really important to us. Both Gaelic and Taiwanese are quite strongly oral traditions, and there's a good argument that language is fundamentally spoken and that writing is secondary. We can get into the philosophy of that, but I'm kind of fairly convinced by that.
Philosophy and the politics.
Yep, and the politics. So to have those stories available, particularly I think for the Taiwanese, but also for the Gaelic, felt really important. A friend of ours who lives very close by here in Beitol sent a picture of his in-laws. His mother-in-law was looking at the book and they'd been listening to the stories in Taiwanese over breakfast together. And I just thought that was absolutely lovely, that those stories can then be available to people who don't necessarily read Tâigí or characters. Also, our Gaelic writers were just so excited to hear their stories in Taiwanese and not be able to understand any of it, but know what the story is and to get the shape of the story in a different language. And the same thing for our Taiwanese writers, listening to their stories in Gaelic and those sort of lovely sounds of Gaelic, which felt like they worked very well for the Taiwanese stories. So I think that audio component's been really important, and all the stories are online on taigael.com/stories, and you can listen to them all for free without logging in or anything. But I think the difference is there's not that unbroken tradition of generally shared written language for Taiwanese here in Taiwan, whereas I think in Scotland, Gaelic is very much seen as a literary language with a tradition. Taiwanese is that as well, but it's not necessarily as well known. So many people have said to me, oh, you can't write Taiwanese, and they say, but you can't write Taiwanese. That's a very common idea. There's not that idea with Gaelic,
Right.
Because it has such a long written tradition as well.
So it's commonly accepted that there is a writing system that, and pretty much everyone who speaks would be able to write then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it for today, but we do not end our chat with Will here just yet. Join us in the next episode where we will be talking a bit more about the Scottish half of the book and about Gaelic. Thank you, Will, and thank you everyone for tuning in.